Good evening, dear friend. It's nice to see you again. Or perhaps we're meeting for the very first time. If that's the case, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Samuel Harper. Some folks call me Sam, but most just call me the old storyteller on Willow Lane. I suppose I've carried stories with me for as long as I can remember. I've lived many years, watched many seasons pass, and somewhere along the way, I learned that stories are more than just words. They're memories we borrow, moments we revisit, and sometimes they're gentle lights that keep us company on quiet nights like this one. You'll find me here most evenings, in this little corner, with my lamp glowing, my tea warm, and the night, whispering softly outside the window. Some nights I speak of old neighbors, some nights of forgotten gardens, and sometimes of strange little mysteries that never quite found answers. If you ever feel a little lonely, or simply wish to drift into a peaceful sleep, well, that's why I'm here. To sit with you, to keep you company, and to share a gentle story that settles the heart. So, make yourself comfortable, wrap that blanket around your shoulders, let the day fall behind you, and the quiet night gather around us. I'm Samuel Harper.
Hi.
And it's my pleasure to tell you a story tonight.
That night, the house showed Hannah what Willow Lane had forgotten. She didn't walk there. She simply found herself inside. The hallway was brighter now, the amber light steady and calm. The walls no longer felt distant. They felt close, supportive almost. The photograph from before rested on the table again, but this time it was clearer. Hannah recognized the people. They were the lane, not metaphorically, literally. Men and women standing where houses now stood, their shapes overlapping faint outlines of roofs and fences. Children sat where gardens would later grow. Trees were younger, thinner, barely more than ideas reaching upward. This was before addresses, a voice said, not aloud, but within the space itself. Hannah didn't feel afraid. This was when people stayed until the lane decided who they were. Images shifted around her. She saw families arriving, some welcomed easily, others fading slowly until they left without knowing why. She saw routines forming, morning walks, waved greetings, solidifying into the version of Willow Lane she knew. And the ones who didn't fit? Hannah asked softly. The house pulsed. They were remembered elsewhere. The child appeared beside her. Some places keep people, the child said. Others keep memories. Hannah looked around. What does Willow Lane keep? The house answered, balance. Hannah felt the weight of it then, the reason things were slipping, the reason the lane felt unsettled. Something had stayed too long, or someone had been forgotten too completely. And the house? Hannah asked. The walls warmed. I am what remembers when the lane cannot. The image shifted once more. Hannah saw herself, not as she was now, but arriving years ago, standing uncertain at the edge of the street. She saw how easily she had fit, how quietly the lane had accepted her. Too easily. The realization settled gently. You're checking me, she whispered. The house did not deny it. The child met her gaze. Everyone gets checked eventually. The lights dimmed slightly. Outside, Willow Lane slept uneasily, and somewhere within its memory a decision began to form.
Night came to Willow Lane without the usual signals. No gradual dimming, no soft chorus of insects warming the dark. The light simply paused, as though the day had been interrupted mid-thought, and then darkness settled carefully over everything at once. Hannah stood at her bedroom window, watching the street below. Every house was dark, not asleep dark, unlit. Even the unfamiliar house had gone still, its amber glow withdrawn completely. It stood like a silhouette cut from the night, edges softened, presence undeniable. The lane felt suspended. Hannah became aware of her own breathing, each inhale sounding louder than it should. She tried to listen for something, anything, but even the quiet felt deliberate, shaped. She glanced at her clock. No numbers glowed back at her. The screen was black, reflective enough that she could see her own face faintly staring back. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked unfinished, like a thought not fully formed. She stepped away from the window. The floor beneath her feet was warm. That stopped her. Wood did not retain warmth like that, not this evenly, not this patiently. She knelt and pressed her palm against the floor, feeling a gentle heat pulse beneath the surface, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. The realization came without panic. The lane wasn't just quiet, it was listening again. A soft knock sounded at her door. Hannah didn't jump. She already knew who it was. When she opened the door, the child stood there, calmer than ever, eyes reflecting something deeper than the hallway light behind Hannah. "It started," the child said. Hannah nodded. "The choosing." The child tilted their head slightly. "The remembering." They walked together, barefoot and unhurried, down the stairs and out into the street. Doors opened quietly along Willow Lane, not all of them, but enough. People stepped outside, not confused, not frightened, just attentive. Mr. Keene stood beside his car, hands folded loosely. Mrs. Dalloway clutched her cardigan closed, gaze distant but peaceful. Others Hannah recognized only vaguely, as though they had always been slightly out of focus. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The unfamiliar house began to change. Its outline softened first, edges blurring into the night air. Then the walls seemed to breathe outward, expanding, not in size but in presence. The house felt closer to everything at once, as though it had folded space inward. Hannah felt the pull again, stronger now. But this time it wasn't only on her. The lane itself leaned toward the house. Trees bent subtly, leaves trembling without wind. The pavement warmed beneath their feet. Windows reflected not faces, but moments, arrivals, departures, laughter caught between years. "What happens now?" Hannah whispered. The child looked at her. The lane checks its balance. A woman near the far end of the street took a hesitant step forward. Hannah didn't know her name. She never had. The woman's outline wavered slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. She looked around, blinking slowly, as if seeing Willow Lane for the first time. "I don't think," she said softly, "I was supposed to stay." The house responded, not with sound, but with recognition. The woman's form grew lighter, thinner, until she faded gently into the dark, leaving no space where she had stood, no gap, no absence, just completion. Others shifted uneasily. A man Hannah remembered waving to once, years ago, stepped back instinctively, relief crossing his face as the house's attention passed over him. The child turned to Hannah. "And you," they said. The warmth beneath Hannah's feet deepened. Memories rose uninvited, her arrival, her unpacking, the way Willow Lane had felt immediately familiar, too familiar, like slipping into a role already prepared. "You belong," the house seemed to say, not possessively, not kindly, factually. Hannah exhaled slowly. The lane waited. Then, one by one, the streetlights flickered back on, soft, steady, normal. The warmth faded, the silence loosened, night sounds returned carefully, like guests re-entering a room after a difficult conversation. The unfamiliar house stilled again, its shape firming, edges settling. People began to move back toward their homes, conversations starting and stopping, as though unsure whether they were allowed. Mrs. Dalloway glanced at Hannah, smiled faintly, and nodded, as if acknowledging something she wouldn't remember in the morning. Soon only Hannah and the child remained. "It's done?" Hannah asked. "For now," the child replied. They turned toward the trees at the end of the lane. Before stepping into the shadows, the child looked back once. Willow Lane doesn't like to rush, but it never forgets. Then they were gone. Hannah stood alone in the street. Above her, the unfamiliar house watched quietly, balanced. When you're ready, say Scene 8, and we'll continue toward the quiet, unsettling conclusion of episode. Morning returned to Willow Lane as though nothing had happened. The sun rose in a familiar place. Birds resumed their cautious songs. Somewhere a kettle whistled, sharp and ordinary. The lane looked calm, so calm that Hannah wondered briefly if the night had been nothing more than a dream shaped by exhaustion. But the house was still there. It stood across the street, unchanged in structure, yet subtly different. Its colors seemed paler, as though someone had gently diluted them. The ivy along its side had lost some of its lushness, leaves curling inward like thoughts being withdrawn. Hannah watched from her porch, wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember fetching. People stepped outside again, slower than usual. Conversations felt careful, as though everyone sensed the ground beneath them might still be settling. Mrs. Dalloway watered her roses, humming faintly. The blooms remained, no longer impossibly full, but healthy, real. Mr. Keene finally drove away, his car behaving as expected. Children waited for the school bus, laughing too loudly, as if noise itself were reassurance. No one mentioned the night.
Yet small absences lingered. The woman who had faded, no one noticed her house missing because there was no empty space. Where she had lived, a narrow garden now rested, freshly turned soil dotted with wildflowers that looked as though they had always belonged there. Hannah crossed the street again. This time the unfamiliar house did not pull her in. Its porch boards no longer warmed beneath her feet. The air around it felt thinner, less attentive. She stepped inside. The amber light was gone. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows instead, revealing dust, ordinary dust, drifting lazily. The wallpaper still bore its leaf pattern, but the colors had softened to something almost cheerful. The hallway was shorter now. The photograph still rested on the small table, but when Hannah lifted it, the faces were gone entirely. Only the lane remained, empty and peaceful. Upstairs, rooms felt incomplete. Furniture outlines marked the floors where things had once been, but no objects remained. It was as if the house had already begun packing itself away. "This isn't goodbye," Hannah whispered, unsure who she was speaking to. The house did not respond. But she felt a gentle loosening, like fingers unclasping. When she stepped back outside, she noticed the plaque beside the door. Where it had once been blank, faint lettering now appeared, not carved, not etched, but simply there. Remembered. By evening, the house's windows no longer reflected the lane. They reflected the sky.
Days passed. Willow Lane regained its rhythm, though it never returned entirely to the way it had been before. Some routines resumed easily. Others adjusted themselves quietly, without discussion. People forgot details. They forgot standing in the street together, forgot the shared stillness, forgot the child at the end of the lane. But they remembered feelings, a sense of having been measured, of having been gently sorted and set back into place. Hannah noticed changes in herself, too. Time felt steadier. Rooms in her house no longer stretched or resisted her presence. The hum beneath the silence had softened to something like contentment. Yet she remembered, not everything, but enough. She remembered the warmth beneath her feet, the way the house had listened, the child's calm certainty. One afternoon, Hannah found a small notebook tucked into her coat pocket. She didn't recall owning it. Inside were notes written in her own handwriting, observations about the lane, about arrivals and departures, about how some people blended into places while others remained separate, no matter how long they stayed. The final page held a single sentence: "Belonging is not permission, it is alignment." Hannah closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. Across the street, the unfamiliar house continued to fade. Not suddenly, gradually. Its outline softened week by week until neighbors began walking past it without looking twice, then without looking at all. One morning, Hannah woke to find the space empty. No demolition, no noise, no explanation. Where the house had stood, a stand of young trees grew. Thin trunks, fresh leaves shimmering softly in the light. They looked as though they had always been there, roots deep and settled. Children played between them that afternoon. No one questioned it. That evening, Hannah sat on her porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. At the far end of Willow Lane, near the curve where the road met shadow, she thought she saw a small figure standing still, watching. When she looked again, there was only the road.
Years later, Willow Lane would be described as a quiet place. Real estate listings would praise its calm, its balance, the way people seemed to stay longer than planned. Neighbors would wave, gardens would grow predictably. Children would return as adults, bringing families of their own. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone would arrive and never quite settle. They would feel it first in small ways. A room that never felt comfortable. A path that seemed to loop strangely. A sense of being gently out of step. Most would leave. Some would stay too long. On those nights, Willow Lane would grow quieter than usual. Hannah grew older there. She remained in her house, aging naturally, comfortably. She became a familiar figure on the porch, someone newcomers greeted instinctively, though they could never quite explain why. Sometimes they asked her questions. "Has it always been like this?" they would say, gesturing vaguely at the lane. Hannah would smile. "Yes," she'd reply, "more or less." She never spoke of the house. She never spoke of the child. But sometimes, late at night, she felt the lane shift its attention, not sharply, not urgently, just enough to remind her it was still awake. On one such night, Hannah dreamed she was standing at the end of the street. The child stood beside her, unchanged. "You did well," the child said. "What happens to you?" Hannah asked. The child looked toward the trees. "I go where I'm needed." "And the lane?" The child smiled faintly. "It continues." Hannah woke just before dawn. Outside, Willow Lane rested peacefully, houses aligned, trees breathing softly in the early light. Nothing moved that shouldn't, nothing stayed that didn't belong. And somewhere beneath the pavement, beneath the roots and routines, the lane remembered itself, quietly, carefully, ready to listen again when the time came.